Welcome to episode number 6 of the National Land Realty podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Today, our topic will be inherited land, where we will learn about the complexities of inheritance and how best to deal with these types of situations from the perspectives of a buyer or a seller. Our guest today is land professional Cailein Campbell out of Wilmington, North Carolina. Cailein formerly served in the United States Navy and is a lifelong resident of North Carolina. He graduated with honors from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and is one of the few agents in North Carolina to be awarded with the designation of Accredited Land Consultant. He is a lifelong hunter and outdoorsman, and for him, land management is just a way of life. Cailein has a wealth of knowledge, and working with inherited land is one of his specialties. Now, sit back and enjoy the show. All right, so I'm sitting here with Cailein Campbell out of Wilmington, North Carolina, and we're talking about inherited land. Real quick, Cailein, why don't you just walk me through it? How did you get here? How did you end up working with land in the first place? How did you enter this world, and sort of what was your experience over the years?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Mac. I was actually raised in Western North Carolina on a property, and my family has always been into real estate, land development, and different facets of land. After high school, I actually joined the Navy and spent 5 years abroad and traveling the world, and came back to Wilmington, North Carolina in southeastern North Carolina to attend University of North Carolina at Wilmington. And as I was going to college, I got my real estate license and started selling with National Land Realty. Working during the day, going to classes at night. And it was neat because I was able to, learn a little bit of business in the night classes and kind of apply it firsthand day to day and kind of see how that, kind of worked together. But as soon as I got into real estate and specifically land real estate, I knew it was for me. Never sold houses, never had an interest to sell houses. It's just land is a great investment. And you'll learn so much, and it will take you so many different ways, and it's a great thing.
Yeah, and how many years have you been in the land industry?
This will be my 8th year.
8th year, and because I like to ask that, and especially in your case, like you are one of our younger agents, and you've been one of the most successful in the entire organization. You've proven your mettle over the years, and I think that's a pretty remarkable success. So we're here talking about inherited land, and it's sort of it's a good topic to cover because a lot of people run into it. It's a very emotional topic because of the nature of what it is. This is when somebody in the family has passed away and left land to either designated through a will or, a lot of the times people don't even get their wills done up and you enter into the negotiations that come with land. Walk me through sort of, your experience with inherited land and how you work with families and sort of like the entry point, right? So like you're coming into a conversation and you find out that somebody is looking to sell land from like grandfather, grandma, that they're working with, and just kind of walk me through the introductory stage and how sort of like you get your head around it.
Sure. So first and foremost, I'm not an attorney. I don't claim to be an attorney. And if you have any, specific legal questions, always contact counsel. Every state's different. I'm located in North Carolina, so I can kind of speak to that. The processes in selling inherited land can be a little it's subjective to the property and to the situation. A lot of times, sometimes people will die without a will, and this state, sometimes has to go through a probate process, and it can be messy. So when I have a family that wants to sell inherited land, the first thing that I do is I look at the title, the deed, and try to just get a feel for the story of the property, the ownership, how they got it, when they got it, and learn as much as I can. Every property has its own story. That's one of the fascinating things about land for me is I can connect with people because it is sentimental. And a lot of times people will inherit land all the way back from the land grants from England. So every property has a story, and learning, the story to the property will help you get it either sold or bought or settle the estate or whatever the case may be. I've dealt with, quite a bit of inherited land. And a lot of times, unfortunately, when you pull the deed and the last deed was, 1927, and you look at how many family members are involved now, and they've had children, and the children have had children, it just goes on, and it multiplies. A lot of times the attorney and legal work to get it figured out who owns it sometimes is more costly than what the property's worth. And what you'll have these properties that'll go into, tax foreclosures, where people weren't paying the property taxes simply because I've dealt with people who frankly didn't know that they owned a property. We'll get a property under contract. We'll go to the closing, have the attorney will do all the deed work and title research. In North Carolina, we still use attorneys for that. Some states use title companies. But, you do the title work, and next thing you know, Aunt Sally had 3 kids, and one of those had a child, and now they have a 25% ownership interest in the property, and they had no idea. And a lot of times that's where you'll get into, families will have internal debates and discussions, and it can become problematic. And sometimes it's easily resolved, but it's very subjective to the property and to the family. It's not the same scenario every time.
Right. Yeah. Because there's a lineage of succession with inherited properties, right? Like there's in most cases, property will go to the spouse if the spouse is still living. But if there's different arrangements between if they had children before their current marriage, then there has to be division between the spouse and those children. And then it succeeds to children with that spouse. And if that spouse is living, the splits, and it varies from state to state on how they manage these things. And I think it's probably wise that we jump into that on a state by state level, because that would take us all day. And like you said, we're not attorneys. But walk me through sort of some of the conflicts that arise when a family has inherited land, because people problems are always people problems. And, talk me through sort of like the difficulty in working with families or the ways to do it successfully, and sort of what you've seen. What would your words of advice be to a family that has inherited land together and is trying to figure out what to do?
Sure. Well, there's always one in a family. And, a lot of times I'll deal with families, and, there's one individual that doesn't want to sell, and the rest do. And I'm sure every state's different. However, sometimes you can petition for division. You can say, okay, well, Uncle Jim doesn't want to sell his 25% interest. The rest of the children do. So let's all agree upon a fair market value for the property. And then we'll divide the property. We'll cut out his 25% interest and convey it to him. And then we'll have the rest of it and the remainder, and then we'll sell that together. I've done that several times. It's not every property where I'm located is 100-acre perfect square field that has equal value across every bit of it. So just, as an example, just because it's 100 acres doesn't mean that 25% interest is 25 acres. Some of the property can be wetland. Some can have non-suitable soils for septic tanks. Some can have a really nice timber value on one side and then could be cut over on the other. So again, it's subjective to the property. The biggest thing is making sure that everybody in the family agrees to an overall value of the property. And that can be achieved by, contacting your local land broker that can do a broker's opinion of value or a comparable market analysis for you. And, National Land Realty has agents all over. And that's one of the things we help people with is figure out the value of their property. And once you can figure that out, then you can look and say, okay, well, how can we divide this equitably for everybody so that the one party that doesn't want to sell can retain their interest in theirs and the rest of the family can. I recently worked with a buyer. There's a really nice farm near in my market where I sell, and it was owned by 5 or 6 individuals, all family, and none of them got along. They all wanted to sell, but none of them wanted to work with one another. And it took the buyer about 5 years to get the property in its entirety. And he bought one person's interest out at a time. And it took him about 5 years to do it.
So this is where did the parcel stay intact and they just had joint ownership, or was he buying No,
he was buying, correct. So the parcel stayed intact. So when he bought Aunt Sally's interest in the property, well, guess what? You've got this buyer now that has, a fifth interest in the property with the rest of the family.
So he's using the property along with Uncle Bill and whoever else is there. Okay.
Right. And for any investors that are listening, a key, and even landowners, you need to think if you want to maximize what you get for your property, something to keep in the back of your mind is, let's say a property is owned by 4 heirs, 4 individuals. When you go buy one of them out, a lot of times, it's what you're buying them out is not, it might be 25% of the property, but it's not 25% of the value, because now you own a property with 3 other people and you don't have controlling interest. So to break it down, if you're looking to if you have a property that's owned by 2 people and you're just to buy one of the parties out, what you pay for that shouldn't be half the value of the property, because you're not getting half controlling interest of the property. You're not able to do what you want. You can't build a house on it without the other person's approval. You can't, cut the timber if there's some timber on it without the other person's approval. So just because you buy a certain percent ownership interest out of a property doesn't mean that you can realize the full value of that property. So sometimes buyers will, like this gentleman, would go and buy out one at a time and realize that discount for knowing that it's not the full controlling interest. And then when he gets it all, well, now he's got X amount of money invested in the property that's been discounted each time. So he's sitting in a nice position when he buys the property. And that's something that's important for sellers to keep in mind too, to landowners, that, if the family can agree to sell the property in its entirety as a whole, and work together, a lot of times you want to maximize what you'll get for the property, because you're not going to discount it by not selling controlling interest at each transaction.
So yeah, that's a really good point to bring up, because just because you have let's just go with lowball figures, you've got a $500,000 parcel that you're working with your family, and let's say there's 2 people. You're not going to sell half of the interest or half of the controlling interest of that for $250, right? Because you got to take into account that whoever buys in has to ask your permission to do anything with the land. So you're not going to attain the full value of the property that you might otherwise get if you had everybody on the same page and were able to sell in its entirety. You might end up selling that for $150 because, maybe your brother's a pain and the person who's buying doesn't want to work with them very well, and they just want in on the land or something. Any given scenario could cause a lot of results out of that. So you're going to do better business and get more value out of it if you get your whole family on the same page.
Sure. And what happens, Mac, if with your example of one property with 2 owners, you buy one of the 2, you now own 50% of the property. And let's say you can't agree on, how you're going to split it to divide the property. So you own together this one property. And let's say that other person dies and they've got 4 kids. Well, now you still own 50% of the property, but now you have all those other people that you're dealing with, and it just became convoluted.
Because that's been happening. All the children, and now you've got 4 other owners that control 50% of the stake. Yeah.
Correct. So a lot of times, I had a man tell me one time, he said, Cailein, he said, it's a lot easier to divide money than it is land. And there's a lot of truth to that. So I work with a lot of landowners. The children have no interest whatsoever in the property. They know they're not going to come back and settle on the land. They're not going to farm the land. They're doing their own thing, their own life. We'll market, we'll get top dollar for the property, then they'll take that money and they'll disperse it to the children accordingly. And that's, that we've done that quite a bit.
Yeah. And that's a good point to bring up too, right? That's a lot of the times where you run into this scenario where it's inherited land looking to be sold is a lot of your agricultural communities, children have graduated from high school and moved off and like gone to a different town, and grandpa passes away or dad passes away or any of those, circumstances, and they're not agricultural kids, or they're not, outdoorsy, or they own something they don't know how to manage. And so they need to offload that, either for tax purposes or just they don't know it, or any number of things. Right.
And that can be it can be a touchy subject. I mean, I own land personally, and, it's sentimental, and, and I can connect with people that, the children don't have an interest in it. And now they've built something their whole life, maybe their dad's life and their life, and now the children don't want it. So it's there's a lot of sentiment that goes into land, and there's a lot of, you got to just be cautious when you're dealing with landowners and buyers or whomever. Just, there's a lot of emotions can run high in land. And it's something to look out for.
Yeah, I was going to say, so, obviously, number one is any family that ends up in a situation like this needs proper legal counsel and to get an attorney right away to help them deal with it. And probably somebody in accounting to deal with the taxes, sort of the ins and outs of that. But you brought up specifically, a land professional. I always kind of talk to this, and I'm sure it's kind of beating it to death on the podcast kind of thing, but I just make sure to get it out there. Is like, it's not your average real estate person. Like somebody who deals in residential real estate comes in and they're not, you don't know the value of a holding pond, in an area for irrigation, or how to evaluate a timber stand, or even the timber stands can be evaluated, or those kind of things. So it kind of starts, one of the first steps is to get a proper evaluation of the land. What are you looking at when you go in to look at the lands to give evaluation? And it not even really an inherited situation, but just to kind of give people an idea as to what you look at.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Mike. I mean, I'll sell houses when it's attached with land. I don't go into neighborhoods and sell houses. That's not my specialty. That's not how I'm geared. I'm strictly a land guy, and that's all I've done. That's all I've wanted to do. And, and fortunately at National Land, a lot of our brokers, I would say, if not all of them, can appreciate land and value it like I do. So when you go on a property, you can pick up on certain nuances. We look at soil types. In my area in southeastern North Carolina, we have a lot of wet natured soils, and I've got some friends that sell land in the mountains, and it's very rocky. So when you're thinking about perk sites or septic tanks, that adds a lot of value to a property. If you can put a house on it, versus if you can't, how much wetland, how much usable land do you have on the property? Are there any conservation easements on the property that would devalue the property? Are you allowed to cut your timber if you have timber? If you have timber, what's the value of the timber? So there's a lot of, it's all specific to the property. And with the exception of a few, like, for instance, location is always important. But, there's a lot of things that go into value on a property. If you don't specifically deal in land, and specialize in land, you might miss some of those things that may make your landowner an extra 20 or 30% more. And conversely, if you're a buyer looking to invest in land, it's always advantageous to go through a land broker, because there's certain things they want to look for on your behalf that may not pop on a title search. I just closed 850 acres a couple of weeks ago. And, during the closing process, we find out that the mineral rights have been retained by the previous owner. And, having relationships in the business, we were able to get the mineral rights back from the previous owner and convey them to the new buyer. So, there's a lot of nuances and kind of specialty items that you got to look out for, whether you're a seller or a buyer dealing with specifically land.
Yeah, and that's something it's a really good point to bring up is one, working with a specialist like yourself that knows to look for these things, because it's really easy to miss them. So for instance, if somebody was looking to sell land, they might not know that they're retaining the mineral rights, and that could devalue the property when somebody is looking to buy it. And because, those are pushed through with your conveyances, and maybe even like you don't own the mineral rights and you're trying to sell the land, and because all you have is, let's say your family bought it years ago and you got 50% of the mineral rights and the previous owner retained 50. And so you're selling the land with 100% of your mineral rights, but that still only comes out to 50% of the total mineral rights. And if you're not paying attention through that process, it's really easy to not be able to get full value out of it. And especially with people who have inherited land, moved away, don't really know the land, it's really important to find a professional like yourself that can work with you and make sure to kind of maximize what you get and make sure that the process goes well.
Yeah, I'm dealing with a property right now that has a road that takes you right to it. And unless you thought to go pull the deed, and it's a private road, to go pull the deed and see if it speaks to the legal description speaks to a deeded easement or references a plat that shows an easement on it. Just because there's a road that goes to the property doesn't necessarily mean that's a legal access to it. And, I don't want to get into, like I said, I'm not an attorney and every state's different, but, there's different forms of easements. And a lot of times some properties, back in the day, people would just cross people's properties, back before the 40s and 50s, 1940s and 50s. And it was, people looked at land more, it was private ownership, but there was more of a sense of community, and you could cross someone's land to get to yours. And, easements weren't as detrimental. Not having was not as detrimental then as it is now. And so if you've got, speaking to inherited property, a lot of times if it's inherited property, well, that means it hasn't sold in a long time. And which means that if it doesn't front on a public road, that's something I look out for and say, okay, well, if it hasn't sold in a long time, chances are it may not have a deeded easement to it, because at that time when it was inherited, that just wasn't the thing that they were big on doing in my area. So there's a lot of, inherited land is a lot more than just than land that's inherited. There's a lot of things that go into it that can kind of shape the value of a property. And really,
and what you're bringing up is really important. How long has it been since the property sold? Because exactly for what you just said is, you used to be able to do so much with just a handshake, and nowadays, like, you can shake hands, but you want to have an attorney standing beside you when you do.
Yeah, I've got a land investor. I mean, I don't know. I think he did probably 14 or 15 transactions with me last year, and he hates signing offers. He's a farmer. Cailein, I'm a man of my word. I shake your hand. I'm gonna stand on what I say, flat foot. I'm gonna do what I say. And I said, I agree. I am too. But it's 2022. We've got to get it. It's the same conversation every time. We've got to get it in writing. And that's what I love about land is you deal with people, that are typically like-minded, and if they're going to say they're going to do something, they're going to do it, and they're going to stand by it. And it's really salt of the earth people that are just land ownership is different than anything else. And you deal with a lot of people that are just good, honest, genuine people. And that's one of the reasons I love what I do, is the people I get to work with. And that's the most important thing to me, and helping them and learning from them. And if I can show them something where I can, create a little extra value for their property, so be it.
Yeah. So, and talk to me a little bit about, specifically with working with a family, working with, an inherited piece. Do you like to get them all in the same room? Are you talking to them all separately? I mean, a lot of the times they're probably not even living in the same state. So how do you kind of organize the family, and what's the best way for them to put themselves together? Do they have sort of like a primary speaker? Should they designate somebody to kind of like work on their behalf, or should you work with them as a collective whole? What's been the easiest process that you've worked with?
It's really dependent upon the property and the family. Really, the family.
Sort of their comfort zone then?
Yeah, and I've sat down in someone's kitchen with all the family gathered around, and we worked it out, and it was fine. And I've done deals where, they don't speak and will not speak to one another. And in that situation, I work with everybody individually and communicate as much as I can in writing as well as verbal, but mostly in writing, so that I have something to refer back and say, such and such said we could do this. What are your thoughts on that? And just document everything. What makes it super easy on everybody is, to hire an attorney that specializes in real estate and inherited property, or does wills and probates and things, that know the process and have that one point of contact. And that's something I always recommend to families that don't see eye to eye, that are struggling with how to do something like this. Is, look, I'll tell you what it's worth. I'll tell you the best way to sell it. But we all have to agree at some point. And my biggest fear as an agent is, getting a property agreed to list and market and sell, and you get a buyer. And this has happened to me. And I've gotten a buyer that's within 10% of the asking price. And you've got one of the owners that are saying, no, I don't want to sell at that price. And the rest of them do. So, I would say to landowners out there that are listening, that are dealing with inherited land, managing expectations and getting all of the conversations and emotions out up front before you try to list and market and find a buyer, and say, okay, if we list this, what are we really looking to sell it for? And in today's market, a lot of times we're getting, equal to or even above asking price. But, I think having those conversations ahead of time and managing those expectations, just with complete clarity, with all the siblings or whomever owns the property joint together, it will ease a lot of heartache in the future for everybody and make everything go a lot smoother, which is good for everybody. Because when a deal, starts off smooth and continues smooth, and everybody knows what they're expecting, and those properties, in my experience, will close easily with not a lot of issues. If you start off with problems and you start off without realizing what everybody wants to get for it, or how they want to divide it, or what have you, problems typically continue to compound. And real estate deals are complicated from day one, are only going to get worse with time. But the good thing is, if you've got a good agent that can manage that for you and set those expectations with the family and kind of control the situation, then you can get the property sold or bought or whatever you're looking to do.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point as far as kind of setting the table, right, for everybody. You've got a family going into a situation, potentially where there's multiple owners at stake, where between 2 and however many kids there are, grandkids, or however it's set up, is that you're going to have a lot of opinions. You're always going to have that family member that's gung ho and like starts running with the ball before everybody else is ready to play. And then you're going to have, there's always that family member that doesn't want to agree with anybody. Like there's always going to be those pieces, because people are going to people, and your family is, they always, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. Like you're going to have those complications, and getting everybody to agree before you make any steps, and then work with an agent and say, what is your expectation of selling value? How fast are you looking to sell it? What are you looking to do with this? Why are you looking to sell? And getting everybody on the same page there enables people to move forward without hurt feelings, because it's always, when there's a failure to communicate up front, that's when somebody starts feeling left behind. That's when somebody starts lashing out. That's when somebody says, well, fine, I don't want to sell and I'm going to maintain my portion. That's when all the complications arise, right? So how do you set the stage for that when you go into a situation like this and you've got a family for the first time? Do you make sure, like, hey, have you all talked? Like, how do you go about that?
So usually there's one person in the family that kind of controls the conversation for the family. And I've been in situations where that's not true, that it becomes very awkward. But in most cases, there's usually a spokesperson for the family. And when we meet, I'll have a conversation with everybody. But usually there's one person that's kind of important, an executive of an estate, for example, or whatever the case is. And that person will kind of speak for the family. I present what I think is the best way to sell the property to achieve, whatever their goal is. Sometimes it's not the most amount of money. Sometimes it's the fastest sale. Sometimes, it's more important that to certain people that, hey, Farmer John's been farming this for 50 years. I want to make sure that whoever buys it gives him the rights for the next 3 years to farm it. Or, my grandson hunts the property. He'd like to at least finish out the hunting season, so that it's not always about money. And I think the most important thing is learning what's important to the family, and then trying to achieve those things for the family. And a lot of, something we didn't really hit on, but, a lot of times you'll have family members that will buy out other family members. And so you're not conveying a sale to the open public. You're just helping people navigate, if one person wants to sell their interest to the family, helping achieve that. And like I said before, the most important thing is finding out what fair market value is. And then, in situations like that, you don't have to divide the property. If one person just wants to sell their interest, they can sell it to the rest of the family and give the other owners their equitable interest divided amongst everybody else. And that's something I've, that is pretty common, because not everybody wants to sell the property. So they want to hold it.
Yeah. So how do you work with that? Like, so you've got some family members that want to sell and some families that don't. And you already talked to the point of, you worked with a gentleman that slowly just bought stake into one lot or one parcel of property. How are you working with these guys? Like, do you float the idea of subdividing, the land, or do you keep the land whole? Like, I'm assuming this is all given to circumstance, but I just wanted to know sort of like how you've worked with it.
Yeah, it all goes back to what everybody's trying to achieve. What are the motivations for doing it? What are they trying to achieve, and how can we help them, get there? So if the family says, hey, this has been held in our family forever, we just want to preserve it and make sure it stays in our family, and one of the people went out, they could care less, then there would be no need to survey out their portion and assign it to whomever. Simply, they could, deed it to their interest to the remainder of the estate, or however the title was received, and be compensated for that portion. Then the rest of the owners all own, their interest just went up by that percent. And it just goes back to what's the property worth, and what's that interest in that person's property worth. And that's a lot easier to do than selling someone's interest on the open market. Because when you do that, then you need to petition, you need to divide the property, get a skid licensed surveyor survey it out, and divide it accordingly. And a lot of times, a smaller property has a higher value than as a whole. So let's say you've got a 100-acre tract of land, and there's 4 ownership parties, and one wants to sell, the others don't. The other 3 says, "Hey, I'm good with our 75%. We don't want the other person's interest." Well, I'll go in there and we'll divide that one person's interest out, and that property is now worth more than what 25% of the whole was, because 25 acres in a certain area usually sells for a higher price per acre than 100 acres does. So, it's if you're buying out someone's interest when there's other people that still have interest in the property, that's not as valuable. Of their interest is not as valuable because you're sharing with other people. But if you're a petition division, survey out that parcel, you own your 25 acres of a 100-acre farm individually now. It's yours. It's only yours. A, you can get more money because now you're selling 100% of the controlling interest of the property. And B, chances are you just increase the value of your interest because it is now a smaller parcel of land, and typically smaller parcels go for a higher price per acre.
Right.
So there's part of it. If you got 100 acres, let's say it's worth $3,000 an acre, and in the area, 25 acre pieces are selling for $5,000 an acre. Well, your $3,000 acre interest just went to $5,000 an acre when you cut it from the rest of the family.
Right. Yeah. So there's an economy of scale when you're working with big land. Like you buy a ton of it. It's not going to maintain that like $5,000 per. Yeah. And again, it's important that you pointed out that like, yeah, you can parcel off, the land and sell off a unit of that, and then everybody else maintains their section. So it's really just about the family coming to an agreement on, what are they good with. And I'm sure that you've worked with that as far as valuating to where they felt like they got a good value out of the land, that they got their 75%. And then that 25% wasn't overvalued or undervalued, that they sold off. Like, they can't just go in and nobody likes Uncle Bob, so they give him the crappy swamp land that nobody else wants and like put him in a parcel in his little area or something like that. Make everybody agree.
That's a good point because, if Uncle Bob was to sell us 25% to the family, he's going to get less than typically. It's not going to get less. And I would say it's valued less than if you sold it on the open market to someone else. Because when the family buys it, once again, the family's buying it. They have to share the interest with everybody else. It's not their own piece of property. And now it's still 100 acres. Versus if he was to hire an agent to sell it outside the family, he's selling 25 acres as its own piece, 100% controlling interest. And typically that property would be valued more than a 100-acre tract would be. So like I said, it's all subjective to the property and to the family and what the intent and motivation is. A lot of times I deal with people that need the money and they need to sell their interest and they would like to see it stay in the family also. So instead of selling on the open market, they'll have us, help them sell it to work in agreement with the family. We do I've seen these people do life estates also, to where if you need, if someone's living on the property that's elderly and they don't want to move, but they need the money, or you're settling an estate and the family wants to sell the property, but, Uncle Bill's still living on the property, you can still sell the property and give Uncle Bill a life estate or life stay on the property, and he can continue to live there and use it, and continue to sell the property to whomever wants to buy it, and he can live out his days on the property, and it doesn't hinder the sale or hold up a sale.
That's really interesting way to handle it too, is to set it up as, no one's getting kicked out. You're buying, basically you own it now, and then you give permission. That's actually unique to me. I didn't realize you could set it up like that, which is pretty cool about the learning experience it is. But
because sometimes people are living, on the property, and my family personally has a large property in the low country of South Carolina that's been there in the family forever. And we have a family member that's living there, and we're never going to sell. But the thought crossed my mind was, well, how would that be handled? And I've done it in the past where when someone's living on a property, and the family wants to sell it, you just let that person, get a real estate attorney to draw it up, and it's in the deed that person, they can go in and they're going to get paid for their interest in it also, but they're able to live there on site till the end of their days and enjoy the property and use it and live there until they pass.
That's a unique possibility. I'm sure a lot of people don't think of that either. When they're looking at selling, that could be a possibility. I mean, really with land, right? You can do this however you want. It's fairly organic, right?
Well, you don't have to wait. If family says, man, we really wish we could sell that property. Uncle Bill's never going to leave. He's probably got another maybe 7 or 8 years left in him if he's lucky. Then we don't want to wait.
Bill just won't die.
He won't die. And who knows, a buyer might buy it and Uncle Bill might live for another 20 years. You never know if these old people. That's a way where the family can capture the value now and go ahead and sell the property and get paid for it while the family member still is living on the property.
Yeah, it really just comes down to finding an understanding buyer. Like yeah, you're going to own this, but there's going to be this guy cruising around.
Well, see, that's interesting. I saw a lot of recreational properties. Just people will buy to hunt and manage and enjoy. And really, there's a value to having someone that on the property. And especially if you're an absentee landowner and you want to go buy a 300 acre, duck hunting, just a great recreational property in southeastern North Carolina, and you live elsewhere, having someone living there is huge. Because I can tell you, if you're not using it on a regular basis and someone's not keeping an eye on it, you'll start to inherit television sets and couches and sofas and where I am, the dump charges to dump tires. So it's very common. You'll go out in the woods in the middle of nowhere and just see hundreds of tires piled up in the middle of the property. And I don't know about you, but you can't get rid of, I'm going off on the tangent, but you cannot get rid of a tire. I don't know if you ever tried to burn a tire before, but it burns for like 8 days and creates this black
smoke everywhere. Yeah.
I know, burning tire. So, and you have to pay to get rid of it. But long and short of it is, just because someone's living on the property, a lot of times that can be a good thing, especially if you're an absentee landowner. They can keep an eye on it for you, make sure that no one's, trespassing or getting hurt. That's another thing.
Liability.
Liability, man. I'm not an attorney. Every state's different, but I've heard stories where people have trespassed on properties, hurt themselves, has sued the landowner and won.
Oh,
and they were trespassing and got hurt. But it's important. That's why it's always important to post your property. Put purple paint on the property lines, put up posted signs, make sure that you're putting an effort into keeping people off or showing where the property line is, because the liability of someone getting hurt it is a real thing, and it has happened. And I've seen it happen where the landowner is responsible, even when the person that got hurt was trespassing without permission.
That's also things I hadn't thought of. Those are really interesting points. It's like, I know we've got way off on
that's late. I'm telling you,
on inherited land, but it's all conversation. It's all stuff that you have to know, right? It's informational, pieces that people wouldn't think of otherwise. And regardless of how off topic we've gone, it's still, people are going to run into it if they inherit land. It's more so probably if you've moved away from the area and you just don't work with the ranch anymore. Right. And you probably don't know what you don't know.
And that's something that, the majority of the inherited properties that I've sold, there is no one living on it. It's vacant land. They haven't set foot on it. Some have never even seen the property. And that's a very important conversation I have to have with them, because in North Carolina, our standard offer to purchase contract, when you sell a property, you're selling the real property, meaning the dirt, the trees. If you can flip it upside down and it doesn't shake out, that's your real property. So your tires, your TV sets, your couches, all of that, according to the standard contract that everybody uses, typically, has to be removed prior to closing. And, unless you have a caveat or an addendum that speaks to that and says everything there conveys with the property. And that's another reason it's smart to use a land broker, because everything we've talked about, from life stays to having a gatekeeper on a property, the dumping of trash, you can't read that in a book or take a class to learn it. You got to just do it and experience it. And, when you're selling inherited land, a lot of times you're going to have a lot of junk on the property that's hidden in the woods, that if you just sign a blank or standard contract in the state of North Carolina, you're responsible to remove prior to closing.
Right. Old used cars everywhere, right?
Right. And who pays for it? That's the other thing. You've got 8 or 9 heirs. Is one person going to pay to have everything removed prior to closing, and then they get reimbursed at closing for everything to be removed? And then, so it's very subjective, like I said, to the situation, but typically a lot of buyers don't really necessarily are concerned with a couch or a TV here or there. So it's not that big of a deal, but I've seen some pretty incredible junk piles in the middle of the woods that's accumulated over 30, 40, 50 plus years. Right.
Well, yeah. And I mean, number one, families got to go out there and find a good attorney and somebody who knows land, because just because somebody works with inheritance doesn't mean they understand like water rights. So you want an attorney that does things. You want a land agent that can properly give you the current market valuation of what you're working with, and be able to, a lot of, I'm sure what you've spoken to during our conversation here is that a lot of what a land agent has to do is be a mediator. Like, does the family get along or not? Hopefully the family had a will in place, right? So where some of the designation of who owns what is easy, but in the cases where somebody passes away, what is it, intestate, right? Where they don't have a will, and you've got to figure out, does it go to your spouse? Did you have kids before you married your spouse? Because now it's divided between the spouse and those kids, and the kids that you had together have to wait for that spouse to pass away to achieve ownership. Or is there a buyout? Or, there's a lot of things in there that, quite frankly, is out of the land agent's hand that the attorney has to deal with. Is there inheritance tax on the property? How large is it? And will everybody be taxed on whatever they sell for? Those are all things to keep in mind. But really, I mean, the key into the whole equation is the family getting together, figuring out their expectations, and all working together. And if there is an outlier, try to get those taken care of. Somebody disagrees, somebody doesn't want to sell. You got to get that taken care of right out of the gate. Like if they have 15% of the property, maybe you can cut them off a parcel and they'll be happy with that 15% of the property, and everyone else can sell, or just something. Everyone's got to figure it out before they even come to the table with an agent to look at selling. Right.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, hey man, I know we're running up on time, and I know that you've got a day to get to. First and foremost, how does somebody work with you in North Carolina? Who are they reaching out to?
Yeah, so I'm with National Land Realty. I'm definitely biased, but it is the best land brokerage firm in the country, and that's why I'm with them. Nationalland.com is our website, and it's really user friendly, and you can actually choose we've got agents all over the country. So if you're in New Mexico or New Jersey or wherever, you can go to the website and find an agent and then choose that agent in your local area. we're thing about National Land that I love the most is we're a team and we all work together. We're not a franchise company, so we all have a team mentality, and we all are kind of driven to help people. So I can speak confidently that no matter where you are in the country, if you call one of our agents, they're going to be willing to help you, whether it turns into a sale or not. We really believe in giving back and helping people, and that's huge.
Yeah, and Cailein, sorry, go ahead, man.
I would say one last thing I would say, just thinking about with landowners with inherited property, if you can get everybody to agree to use one attorney to handle it, I would highly recommend that. I have seen it play out several different times where when there's more than one attorney involved, they're looking out as their duty for their client's best interest. And ultimately, it turns into more billing hours for the attorney. And it really slows the pace down of getting the property sold and conveyed to a buyer. And it typically doesn't work out for anybody but the attorney. So I would always recommend, if the family can agree to use one professional attorney that specializes in that form of real estate, to use one to represent the family in its entirety. And that way it's fair for everybody, and it moves the transaction swiftly and equitably for everybody.
That's a really good point, because if they're working for the family, it is their fiscal duty to represent everybody equally. So they, by nature, are making sure that everybody gets a fair shake, as opposed to you get attorneys going head to head, both looking out for their party's best interest. It's this tug of war that's probably just going to end up with bills more than anything else.
That's right.
Good points. And Cailein, do you work with a specific type of land there in North Carolina, or have you kind of dialed into a specific area or types of clients that you work with?
I get what I can when I can. The higher end recreational tracts have been really good to me. Just the nature of where I'm located. We've got some world-class bear hunting and duck hunting, within the eastern North Carolina. I do quite a bit of timberland sales because we have a lot of plantation pines in our area, as well as farmland. The thing about farmland is a lot of the people that own it typically don't want to sell it. They want to hold on to it. And that's pretty consistent across the country. But we do a lot of farmland sales. So really, I personally specialize in tracts that are over, 50 or 100 acres. And we have agents that specialize in the smaller stuff too. So if you've got a 10-acre piece that you want to try to sell and someone for a homestead or a home site, we do that too. So really anything that's land related, really I'd say in my area, at least 10 acres and up is kind of what we specialize in. National Land has a commercial division that does commercial real estate also. But personally, I just stick with the larger vacant tracts of land.
Excellent. Well, Cailein, I appreciate your time today, man. Your wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's always great talking land.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I probably do it all day. Hey, I appreciate it. Wish you well, and have a good one.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
This concludes episode number 6 of the National Land Realty podcast, discussing inherited land with National Land Realty land professional Cailein Campbell out of Wilmington, North Carolina. You can learn more about land ownership or the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com.